Lone Rider here, and I want to talk about HEMA or historical European martial arts. Most people just think of it as sword fighting, and indeed, weapons like the longsword in particular tend to be the stereotypical uh, subject matter. There's more to it than sword fighting. There's dagger fighting, unarmed fighting, etc. But most people tend to think of it as sword fighting, and this is a relatively new thing, but it's something that I enjoy. It's new to me anyway. I didn't realize that outside of modern sport fencing and kendo that people still fought with swords, at least until recently. And when I did discover this, it was mostly due to the influence of two websites, Scalagrim and Scala Gladiatoria. And basically, I was doing some internet research on historical weapons and history, and I came across these two channels, and I very quickly became aware that there are actually people who still fight with swords. Not obviously sharp, dangerous swords, but blunt end training weapons with the proper protective gear, such as you know, fairly heavy fencing masks and padded jackets and things like that. And I very quickly said to myself, that sounds like something I want to try. The problem is, I started looking around for a fencing club near me, and I realized that there was none. There was one in North Jersey, way far away, but I don't like driving on highways. When you've been a bicyclist for years and you're used to taking back roads, the idea of hopping on, Interstate 287, for example, and driving for an hour to go, get your butt kicked by a bunch of dudes with swords. It's like, and then you got to drive all the way home after that, and you're tired and you're driving on the highway. And I kept putting it off. But in the meantime, I did my research. I learned as much as I could about swords, and I kept saying to myself, I want to try this one day. And it finally came to a head um, a little less than a year ago, back in the fall. I was riding my bike. I was doing a single speed mountain bike ride with a friend of mine. And we were talking, as we were riding, we were talking about things that, what would you like to do someday that you haven't tried yet? And I mentioned I had, at one point jumped out of a plane, even though I'm not particularly fond of heights. And I said that, one of the things I'd like to do someday, if I ever get around to it, is there's actually like a club up in North Jersey where they teach you how to fight with long swords. And I thought that would be pretty awesome. But, um, it was one of those things like one of those bucket list things. Like, you want to try it someday, just once or twice. Um, but I kept putting it off. I'm not outside of cycling and archery. I don't really do anything athletic. I never played contact sports as a kid. It was one of those things where it's like, you're gonna go and fight people with swords? Like what the hell? Like, what's wrong with you? So I kept putting it off, and then finally one day I went, and it was a blast. It was awesome. It was just so cool. I picked up the first time I picked up a steel sword, and I held it in my hands. And I've held antique swords. I mean, somewhere upstairs there's a saber from the 18th century that has seen better days. Uh, so I mean, I've held antique swords to some degree, but to pick up a sparring longsword, a medieval type sword, like knights used to use, and oh, it was so cool. I had never experienced anything like it, and it was fun, it was safe, it was it was a lot of exercise, it was a lot of work. People overestimate, these things don't weigh as much as folks would have you believe. That the myth is that they're just like heavy iron bars. They're actually incredibly well balanced if they're made right, but they are heavier than you would think. And even the two-handed sword, and it must be said that longsword tends to be incredibly popular because it's fairly easy to use a longsword in the sense of you're dividing the weight between your two hands. If you had to use a one-handed sword that weighed about the same, you'd get very tired very quickly. But it's a workout, and you're moving your whole body around, and it's just I had such a good time. I was like, oh man, I can't wait to come back. So I joined the sword fighting club, and I haven't looked back ever since. There's been a couple weeks that I missed because of the snow. I didn't want to drive up there, but I'm looking forward again to going this Sunday. I've been doing this basically since like December, and it's just something that I think is pretty fun and pretty awesome. And it is kind of funny though when you tell people that you fight with swords. Um, Now, generally speaking, the conception is that if you fight with swords, it's modern sport fencing. Um, and some HEMA weapons, like the small sword, and this is a homemade example based on a shortened epee blade. Some HEMA weapons, like the small sword, are very similar to sport fencing weapons in terms of how they're used, etc. Um, and you have other weapons like a military saber or backsword or rapier that are a little heavier, but not quite as big as a longsword. And then you have longsword, which is, they're ginormous at least compared to a modern sport fencing foil or epee or something. And it's interesting when you tell people you do this. Um, it sort of came up today. I mentioned to somebody. I said, I mentioned about the fencing club and trying to get up there on Sunday. And somebody said, "Oh, you fence?" And I said, "Yeah, well, I mean, it's not your normal fencing club. We fight with long swords." And he goes, "You do what?" And I think a lot of people either haven't heard of this or they just when they hear fencing they just assume like Olympic style fencing. So it kind of was I kind of had to explain what it was, and he goes, "Well, isn't that dangerous?" And I was like, "Yeah, anything's dangerous. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been hit by cars or nearly hit by cars riding my bike because people are fools behind the wheel. But I'm not going to stop riding just because there's a bunch of jerks out there breaking the law behind the wheels of their cars. Uh, I'm not going to not fence with swords just because, theoretically you could get injured. Obviously, I don't want to get hurt, but that's where, training and having an instructor comes into play and proper safety gear. We wear padded gloves, we have the fencing masks, we have jackets, etc. So um, it's not unsafe. Is there a risk? Well, there's a risk to anything. When I jumped out of a plane, there was definitely more of a risk than when I did this. Um, you know, I personally love it. I'm not going to stop doing it. I don't consider myself an expert by any means. I'm a human noob, but it's so much fun, and to me it makes history real. I've never thought of myself as one of those people, who would take up something, what we normally think of as martial arts. I never really was a very, macho man, gonna go beat somebody up, that type of thing. And the truth is, people who do martial arts, whether it's sword fighting or hapkido or taekwondo or whatever, usually aren't like that. There's bad apples in every group. I mean, a friend of mine from the bike shop, used to do Asian martial arts, and he's told me stories about you get people in there who don't control themselves. They throw their weight around a little bit, but that's a minority. The average person who does this type of activity, whether it's hapkido or kendo or sport fencing or historical fencing, isn't interested in it because they want to learn how to hurt somebody, or because they're a bully, or because they're a thug. Um, in fact, generally speaking, what I found with the HEMA people is they're all very reasonable. They're all very they're nice people, And the funny thing that I found is that they're all interested in it for different reasons. Some people are coming from a historical background; they want to learn about it because of the history of the weapons. Other people are coming from other martial arts and they want to learn, maybe a weapons-based martial art rather than something like, let's say, karate. Um, and some people are just interested in the exercise. Other people are coming because they think swords are cool and they want to learn about swords. And you know, who could argue with that? Swords are definitely pretty damn cool. Uh, but it is funny that, the reactions you get, um, I mean, they vary. Not everybody goes, "Oh my God, you fight with swords? What's wrong with you?" There actually are some people, and it's less common, but I have had people tell me, "You fight with swords? That's awesome!" And that always brings a smile to my face because it really is anything you do that you want to devote a significant amount of time to getting good at, whether it's archery or cycling or something more maybe sedentary like writing or painting, but anything that you have an interest in that you want to excel at, that you want to get better at, that you want to learn to be better at. Um, the most basic reason to do it is because it's fun. A lot of people will say, well, okay, I'm doing this because I want to get fit, or it's exercise, or I want to learn self-defense skills, or all of that may be true. But at the end of the day, if it's not enjoyable, if it's not fun, if it doesn't put a smile on your face, there's no reason to do it, right? And I'm one of those people. I wouldn't want to go to a gym. I wouldn't want to sit there and run on a treadmill or lift free weights, or I'd be bored to fracking tears. But you know what? Learning how to fight with a longsword, hell yeah, I want to learn how to do that. So, it's not just exercise. It's exercise that's actually fun and that I'll actually follow through with doing. It's the same thing with cycling. Um, a lot of cyclists are really, really, into the fitness aspect, and they have rollers and they have trainers and they have, I have an indoor trainer. You know what I use it for? I use it as a work stand because, to hold up the bike while I'm working on it. I don't want to, if I'm riding my bike, I don't want to be riding indoors watching reruns of the X-Files. I want to be outside hearing the wind whistle through my fracking helmet vents, okay? I ride because it's fun, not because it's good exercise or it's this or that. It's all of those things, but I do it because it's enjoyable. I do it because it makes me feel a lot more connected to the world than when I'm sitting behind the windshield of a car. I do it because, you know, it gets the blood pumping. It puts a smile on my face. And the same thing, is true with historical fencing. Um, and so, for people who haven't heard of this or haven't considered it, do some internet searches if you're interested. Uh, See if there's a sword fencing club near you. Uh, it's kind of like what I tell people about cycling. There's a lot of people who don't like cycling or just aren't interested in it. Maybe they think all bikers are assholes. But, get them out on a mountain bike trail or a nice long road ride, and they've got a smile on their face. And half the time, they'll stick with it. So if you've ever even thought about what it would be like to hold a medieval longsword in your hand, if you've ever wondered what it would be like to be able to do like what that guy does in the movie you know that you really really liked when you were a kid and secretly still enjoy now, if you ever wonder what it would be like to be like that historical figure, to be like that, whether it's something mythical like a character from Lord of the Rings, or whether it's a figure from history like William Marshall, consider giving it a try. Stop in at a local sword fighting club, and I realize they're not necessarily local. There's, sometimes they're few and far between. It's still a fairly niche activity, but it's growing. It's a lot bigger than it used to be, and there's the one thing I can promise you is they'll welcome you with open arms. Uh, just like the average cyclist, if you stop him, will talk your head off about gear ratios and frame geometry. The average person at a sword fencing club will be happy to show you his sword, happy to explain about the different techniques. Um, they want to share their interest with other people. They want to get more other people involved. They want it to grow and to become a more widespread activity that everybody can enjoy. So, just like I look forward to the day that when you tell people you bike, you're not regarded as like some weirdo eco freak or something. I look forward to the day when, when you tell people you fight with long swords for fun, that that's as accepted as playing soccer or softball or some other thing. So that may not happen in my lifetime, but who knows? It, it's made strides. I mean, hell, there was a New York Times article about the long point tournament. So, uh, you know, uh, that's my take on this, and just a little bit about HEMA. And um, you know, uh, I enjoy it. I can't wait to go back to my next sword fighting meeting and think about it. How often do you get the chance to relive something from history like that? We've all seen pictures of these in books. We've all seen the sword as a symbol. Famously the Statue of Justice. With the blindfold. Yeah, she's holding a scales in one hand. What's she holding in the other hand? A sword, right? And let's face it. Just like people have said that Hollywood would have been a commercial failure without the Colt 45, it probably also would have been a commercial failure without swords. So, you know, this is such an iconic weapon, such an iconic symbol. The chance to hold one in your hand and to learn how to use it, um, in a safe environment where, there's an instructor and there's people there to tell you what to do, and you're not just flailing about. You're actually learning a, a historical fighting system. You're actually bringing something from the pages of an old manuscript, from the pages of a history book, and you're making it real. You're making it live again. I think that's pretty awesome, you know. And I feel I feel blessed to be a part of that. So, um, that's my take on HEMA. And if you ever get a chance, get down to your local HEMA club or your not so local HEMA club, as the case may be, and consider giving it a try. Lone Rider out.